This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so we continue with our study of Ma'arat HaMachpelah to understand how it all began and where we are today in terms of some very practical halachot that come on. So just as a quick review, we began over here, and I should be able to see my screen. We began with Abraham's purchase of Ma'arat HaMachpelah, and that he paid top dollar and made sure that it was clearly his. Why did he want to be buried? Why did he want to bury Sarah, matriarch Sarah there? Well, he knew that that was where Adam and Eve had been buried, and we mentioned the Zohar that when he was preparing the meal for the three passers-by who were angels, but he was not aware of that, and he ran, El Bakar Ratz Avraham, he ran to the flock, and the animal ran away from him, and it went all the way there to Ma'arat HaMachpelah. He smelled the scent of Gan Eden over there, and investigated and saw that Adam and Eve were buried there, and that became the choice place where he would be buried. Machpelah is pairs, duos. So on one hand, Rashi explained, we saw in source number 2, Rashi explained that all the couples were buried there, Adam and Chava, and then would be Sarah and Avraham, Yitzchak and Rivka, and Yaakov and Leah. Also, Machpelah is a duality. There was that scent of Gan Eden because that was the place where heaven and earth were meeting. And that's why it's also in the city of Hebron. Hebron is the root Chaver, Chibur, the place of attachment. We also had, the Gemara Kiddushin, where, do I need to move further? Yeah, we had the Gemara Kiddushin also, that we learn marriage out from that transaction, because that is our destiny. That was an act of giving. Is it too small? Can you see the sources that I have here? Should I turn it into a single page, or it's okay the way it is? Let me try to get into a single page. Give me 1 minute.
Single page is better if you can.
Okay. And then Control plus, no, 1 second. Control plus, no. Why is that happening? Shift plus, no. Okay, I'm not sure how to make it bigger. I need Uzi again. Anybody remember how to make the page bigger? Uzi helped me last time we were on. Anybody recall? No. I thought it was, maybe it's Alter plus, no. Okay, sorry, folks. No, sorry. Okay. Also, we had the Bartanura, who told of his visit to Ma'arat HaMachpelah, where he went to the tomb of the patriarchs, and it was under the control of the Muslims, as it was all the way until 1967. And there was certain areas where people couldn't go, people could go. They were then pretty, the way he described it, they were being pretty fair to their areas where both Muslims and Jews couldn't go. But there was an area, a window above the area of where Avraham was buried, and he was able to pray by that area over there, by that window over there. Okay, so it seems very clear from Rav Avadia ben Bartanura, from his account, that he held that one is able to go and daven there, pray there. But actually, that was quite an issue that was heavily contested by the earlier Rishonim, the earlier commentators on the Talmud, and that machloket, that dispute, carries through all the way until our modern day poskim. So let's take a look at Rabbeinu Nisim, known as the Ran. And he there, and
This conference will now be recorded.
so again, we're going to see Rabbeinu Nisim and his view on a Jew davening in an area that is designated for Muslim prayer. And Rabbeinu Nisim says as follows over here, where it's highlighted in the red. He brings an interesting proof from the Purim story. Here we are getting ready for Hanukkah, but he's bringing from the Purim story. Haman decreed, everyone must bow down to me. And we know Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh. Mordechai refused to bow down. And the Ran writes, again where it's underlined over here, Sheheshtachavia shel Haman, bowing down to Haman, was Hishtachavia shel Elohut haita. It was bowing down to Haman, to Haman, as a deity. So therefore it was the Avodah Zarah. I'm sorry, and therefore was considered to be idolatry. The Alzeh Masar Mordechai Atzmo Lemita. And that is why Mordechai refused to bow down, even though that is something for which Haman very well could have put him to death. However, a Jew does not give up his life, and rather does an Aveira, besides for three cardinal sins. And those are adultery, idolatry, and murder. In those situations, a Jew must be willing to give up his life. And since bowing down to Haman, what the Ran says was absolute idolatry, that is why Mordechai, Masar Mordechai Etzmo Lemita, Mordechai was willing to give himself up to death. Now he then says there are different opinions. Ba'aval gav de patur asur la'asot kain. There are those that say that no, if a person does, there are those that say that one would not be liable for a death penalty for it. Nevertheless, afal gav de patur, even though a person might be exempted from a death penalty, asur la'asot kain. It's certainly prohibited to bow down to a human being.
This conference will now be recorded.
And so too when it comes to the Muslims. He says, Afal pi she'ein to'en acharehen, even though they don't make this error to consider their prophet Muhammad la sotan Elohut, even though they don't turn him into a god, ho'il mishtachavim lifnehem, hishtachava'ah shel Elohut, since they bow down in a God bowing down fashion, din avodas alilim yesh lahen. According to the Ran, that has the status of idolatry. So the Ran's opinion is that entering into a mosque, it has the status of a place of idolatry, and therefore one is not allowed to enter into there. Now again, Rav Avadi Bartanura went into that building which had been constructed as a mosque above the tombs of the patriarchs and matriarchs. But according to Rabbeinu Nisim, that is something that one is not allowed to do. Now look to the right of that, where we have the Rambam and the arrow pointing down to the words of the Rambam. The Rambam Maimonides has a different approach. And he writes as follows, a little background. Meat, of course, we know needs to be supervised. Wine needs to be supervised. But there are different levels. It could be kosher wine, but there's another issue. The other issue is that if it was handled by an idolater, then we are afraid that it was used or shaken, whatever it is, as service to idolatry, at which point not only can't one consume it, one is not even allowed to derive any benefit from it. Now, the Rambam deals with the category of a ger toshav. A ger toshav is not, as we understand, a ger, a convert. A ger means a sojourner who's living amongst us. It is a non-Jew. He has not converted to Judaism. If he converted, he's a full-scale Jew. But a non-Jew who's living amongst us, shekibel alav sheva mitzvot, who has accepted upon himself to follow the 7 Noahide mitzvot. As we've explained previously, the Rambam says, Yeno asur b'shtiyah. One is not allowed to drink his wine. It's unsupervised. We don't know what else might have gotten into there. However, umutar bahaniyah. But one is allowed to derive benefit from it. Why is that? Since he has accepted upon himself not to serve idolatry, we trust he is not serving idolatry. He has not used that wine for any idolatrous purposes, and therefore it's not prohibited from your getting benefit from it. Okay. V'chein kol akum. So too any non-Jew, she'eno oved avodas kochavim, who does not serve, worship idolatry, kigon elu ha-yishmaelim, the Rambam writes, like these Yishmaelim, like these Ishmaelites, like the Muslims, yenan asur b'shtiyah, one is not allowed to drink their wine, because again, we don't know about the kashrut of it, umutar bahaniyah, but one is allowed to get benefit, because since the Muslims do not worship idolatry, there is no concern that it was used in any idolatrous practice, and therefore one is allowed to derive benefit from it. I could sell it. I can give it as a gift to someone. I can get benefit, but I'm not allowed to actually consume it. V'chein horu kol ha'gaonim. And this was the instruction given by all of the sages, all of the Gaonim. However, those who actually worship idolatry, there one cannot get any benefit from that wine. So the Rambam is very, very clear, not like Rabbeinu Nisim, not like the Ran, and says that Islam is not idolatrous. The Rambam continues in a teshuvah that he writes, and he says as follows. The question was about the status of the Yishmaelim, and he writes, teshuvah, the response is, Elo Yishmaelim, these Ishmaelites, Einam Ovdim Avodah Zarah Klal. They are not serving Avodah Zarah at all, idolatry at all. Ukvar nichrutam mipiem umilibam. That's already been cut off from their hearts, from their mouths and from their hearts. Vehem miyachadim lakel yitaleh, and they ascribe a singularity, lakel yitaleh, to the God above, yichud karaui, a proper singularity. There's no trinity. It's an absolute singularity. Yichud she'ein bo dofi, a yichud which has nothing lacking from it. There is this one God in heaven that they call Allah, one God in heaven, the Rambam says, that they worship. Then he goes on to say, even though they might say things that are false about us, as Jews, we can only speak the truth, and therefore we will not say things that are false about them. And then he goes on to say, V'im yomar Adam, if a person will say, Shabayit shem lekalson oto beit avodah zarahu, that their mosques, though, are houses of idolatry. V'avodah zarah tzefuna b'tocho, and there are idols that are hidden inside there. that the earlier generations, their ancestors, used to worship those idols, and in their mosques until today, there are, talking about 12th century now, 11th century, in their mosques until today, the Rambam says, we still have these idols hidden away. Ma bekach, so what? Those who are bowing down in mosques today, the Rambam saying in the 11th and 12th century, Ein libam ela l'shamayim. Their hearts are only to the heavens. V'chein, skipping down, Elo Yishmaelim hayom, the Ishmaelites today, the Muslims today, Kulam, Taf v'nashim, all of them, men, women, children, Nichrita avodah zara mipihem. The avodah zara has been cut off from their mouths.
This conference will now be recorded.
When it comes to the singularity of God, Hashem Yitaleh, ein lahem ta'ut klal. There are no mistakes that they make whatsoever. So therefore, according to the Rambam, Muslims today, mosques today, are not considered to be houses of idolatry. Practical halacha, let's take a look. We'll see now I don't have that, the Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Eliezer Waldenberg, follows the opinion of Rabbeinu Nisim. The first opinion, who compared it to the bowing down of Mordechai to Haman. Mordechai is not bowing down to Haman. And if it's a person, if you ascribe godliness to him, then it will be considered idolatry. So he follows the opinion of Rabbeinu Nisim in determining that Islam is considered avodah zara and therefore prohibits entering a mosque. Rav Ovadia Yosef writes that the normative opinion, let's see it over here. I actually copied it for us. Not sure where I put it now. 1 second. Okay, I'll read first with us over here. Rabbeinu Ovadia Yosef says, Ume'ata nireh, it seems, sheha misgadim ha'aravim, that these Muslim mosques, ein lahem din bate avodah zara, they do not have the status of a house of idolatry. Umutar likanes betocham, and one is allowed to enter them, like the Rambam, not like Rabbeinu Nisim. Va'afilu haran, and even Rabbeinu Nisim, Sha'amar, who said, Sh'ho mishtachim lifneihem, since they bow down, it's kavodash eluhut. It's like bowing down to a deity, and it has the status of avodah zara. Yesh lomar, he says, she'ilu haya havi shmi'alei, if Rabbeinu Nisim would have heard all that the Rambam wrote in his Teshuvah, lo haya omer kain, he would not have said that. Shebevadei harambam hayibaki ben biyoter. The Rambam, Maimonides, lived amongst the Muslims. He was a physician in Egypt. He lived amongst the Muslims, and he is baki bahem biyoter. He is a real expert when it comes to what they do and their beliefs. V'chol raz lo anis lei, Rav Ovadia Yosef writes, and all any secrets were not hidden from the Rambam. So therefore, if the Rambam says that it's okay, that it's not idolatry, we can rely on that. And it's not idolatry. However, should we be entering into the, if we have to, it's not idolatry. Is that something that we should be doing? So if Moshe Sternberg writes, according to this, Hamuzmulim, the Muslims, Einam Ovdei Avodah Zara, they're not considered to be worshiping idolatry. Ubeit Tiflutam Einal Avodah Zara, and their mosques, their places of prayer, are not houses for Avodah Zara. and therefore as a result, mutar likanes letocham. One is allowed to enter there, kishiyesh tzorech, when there is a need to do so. Achen, b'had saku divrei ha'admor, shera'oi litrachek mehem ubeit tfilatam. But nevertheless, it's still proper not to choose to go in there. Ki kol hagoyim arle lev mitaskim b'havlei shav ubekachash toratenu hakadosha, because they deal with a denial of our holy Torah. V'yesh v'zeh chilul Hashem, and therefore it's a desecration of God's name, lachashivam, to give them that honor, levaker shama, to go visiting there. Amnam, be'inenu, be'inyanenu. How about Marat HaMachpelah? How about going to the tomb of the patriarchs? We know Rav Avadia Bar Tanura went there. So you're telling me, Rav Moshe Sternbuch, that one should not do it? How about going to the tomb of the patriarchs? That's not going there to give them honor. That's going there for our own tefillah. So he says, B'inyanenu, when it comes to our topic, which is the tomb of the patriarchs, shenikar shegazluhu, that it's clear that they stole that area from us. Avraham bought it. It's ours. It belongs to the Jewish people. They stole it from us. And even in 1967, when we regained control of the of Judea and Samaria, nevertheless, we allowed the Muslims to maintain a certain control over the Temple Mount and over the tomb of the patriarchs. Now that it's clear that they stole it, our sins led to their ability to take it and control it. To use it now as a mosque. But when we are davening there, it does not serve as a mosque. And it's clear that all those who are entering there, the reason we're entering there, it's nikeret, it's recognizable. Shehi b'shvil kivrei avot. We're going there not because it's a mosque. We're going there not to give honor to a mosque. We're going there because that is where our avot and imahot, where our patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. Ulai kil. Perhaps it is more lenient. She'ein lemechad isur, and would not be a concern of it being prohibited. So therefore, even though, Rav Ovadia Yosef says not a problem going into a mosque. Rav Moshe Sternbuch says it is a problem. You're allowed to do it, but it's not something that one should do. But he concedes that when it comes to Marat HaMachpelah, when it comes to going there to Kivrei Avot, to the burial place of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, then it will not be an issue. And going back up over here, right number 4 here, underneath here, Rav Shmuel Rabinowitz notes that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, right, who was one of the great poskim in Israel, would regularly visit Ohel Yitzchak. He would visit what's called the tent of Isaac, the main area that is used as a mosque, and daven there. Therefore, it is well accepted, like Rav Ovadia Yosef, like Rav Shlomo Zalman, like Rav Moshe Sternbuch, not like the Tzitz Eliezer. It is well documented and accepted that one is allowed to go to Marat HaMachpelah, and it's right. It wasn't that he was allowed to, but Rav Shlomo Zalman chose to, would take the trip to go to that holy place to daven. So going into a mosque is allowed, if not necessarily recommended, but in this case, I would go as far as to say it is allowed and it is recommended. The one last issue that I like to touch upon over here is, how about if a person is a Kohen? As a Kohen we know has added mitzvot, added restrictions. And one of those added restrictions is not to defile himself by having contact with a mate. with a person who has died, with a corpse. Now, that includes, besides not having contact, not being above the graves or not being, not above the grave, but if I'm under the same roof covering, termed halakhically as an ohel, a tent, if I'm under the same roof covering as a mate, that also causes impurity. And a Kohen, therefore, if he goes to a cemetery, this is besides going for parents, children, siblings, or spouse. But besides that, a Kohen would not go to a cemetery. If he does, he will need to stay on the road and make sure that he's not under a common overhang as any of the burial plot areas. And that way, even though he went to a cemetery, by not going under a tree that is both, he's under the tree and the tree branches extend also over the graves, then it is okay. When Natalie was running camp, so there was a road from the girls' camp to the boys' camp. And that road passed by a little cemetery with a big tree, a massive tree that was both over the road and over the cemetery. And some people did a little investigative work. They went to that cemetery and they saw names like Goldberg and Goldstein and Horowitz. They saw very Jewish names on the tombstones that were buried there. Therefore, the assumption is those are Jewish people who were buried there. And therefore, Kohanim would try to take an alternative route as opposed to driving on that road, would take an alternative route so as not to be under that same overhanging tree that was both over the graves and all the Jewish graves and also over the road. So how about a Kohen going to pray at Marat HaMachpelah? So actually the Gemara tells a story, and I have it over here for us to see. The Gemara tells a story of a person going to map out the area. Babylonian Talmud, Baba Batra 57a. The Gemara tells us as follows. Rabbi Bana havika mitzayin ma'arata. Rabbi Bana would mark burial caves. He put marks above the ground. Many were then buried in caves, and he would mark the ground above it. To therefore, if a Kohen would know not to go there, if a person was in the land of Israel and was carrying consecrated food, he would know not to go there. Or if a person was planning on going to the Beit HaMikdash to enter into the temple area, he would know not to go there. Kimata, when he came to Lamarata da Avraham, when he came to the cave of Avraham, to Marat HaMachpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs, Ashkechele Eliezer, he encountered an apparition of Eliezer, the servant of Avraham, Dekai Kame Baba, who was standing by the entrance, making sure no one would go in. Amarle, he said to Eliezer, "My ka'avid Avram, what is Avram doing now?" Amarle Gani bekanfe de Sarah. He is lying in the arms of Sarah. The kama'ainale bereshe, and she is looking at his head, gazing at his head. Amarle, Rav Bana said to Eliezer, "Zeal, go, Amale, go, say to him, Bana kai abava." Bana, that's his name, Rabbi Bana. Bana is by the door. Amar le, Leo. Avram said, Amar le, the English here says, interesting, right? You can go in. Meidi Yediyah Dietzer Bahai Amaleka. Right? It is known that there is no evil inclination in the higher world, and therefore it would not be considered any immodesty if Avram is in the arms of Sarah, and therefore you can go in. Ayel, he entered, Ayin, he looked around, he examined the area to know the dimensions, to know how to mark it above there. Vinapak, and then he went out. The Gemara continues, Kimat l'marata to Adam Arishon. When he entered the area of the cave where Adam Arishon was buried, Yatzta Batkol, a heavenly voice came out, Va'amra, and said, Nistakalta bidemut diyukani. You saw a likeness of the image of God, bidiyukani atzma, but Adam, who is even more considered to be B'Tselem Elokim, whoever will understand that, Al Tistakel, don't look. He said, Habe'ina l'tsuyuni marata, but I need to measure the cave. I need to make sure Kohanim, people who are going to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, people who are carrying consecrated foods, that they know not to walk over here. The heavenly voice said, Kamidat hachitzona, kach midat hapninit. The measurements of the outer one that you saw by Avram, that's the same measurement of the inner one. And those who say that it was a two-story building, he said, like the measurements of the upper one, so too are the measurements of the lower one. So we see Rabbi Bana was concerned that Kohanim should not be going by that area of Marat HaMachpelah. They should not be going by the area where Avram and Sarah, etc., Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov, Leah, Adam and Chava are all buried. Now, there are some Rishonim, some of the earlier commentators, who view this whole thing as a dream. It was a dream that he had, and it gives us a greater appreciation of the mystical aspects of Marat HaMachpelah, in which case we would not discern from here any halachic implications. However, the Tosfot take it a lot more literally. Tosfot asks, why did he need to mark the gravesite of Abraham? There is a different level of tum'ah, of impurity, when it is a Jew versus someone who is a non-Jew. A Jewish body has a greater degree of tum'ah, of impurity, once the person has died, because we understand tum'ah, impurity, to be that which fills the void when kedusha, when holiness has left. So a Jew who has the potential to fulfill all 613 mitzvot, when that person dies, the void is greater, and there is a greater degree of tum'ah. Whereas a non-Jew who only has the 7 mitzvot, so there is less of a void created once the person dies, and that potential, that soul leaves, the potential to do the 7 mitzvot is no longer there, and there is a lesser degree of tum'ah. What is the practical difference between these levels of tum'ah? That is, in both cases, the person is in contact, he becomes impure. The person carries the weight even without actually contacting directly the body. There is tum'ah. But in terms of the impurity of being under the same overhang, that only applies by a Jewish person. That is why in the story that I told you about the road near Natalie's camp, where they went to investigate, are there Jews buried there? If there were only non-Jews buried there, then the fact that they're under the same tree, that tree is covering the road where we're driving, and also the graves is not an issue, because by non-Jews there is not this tum'at, this impurity of ohel, of being under the same overhang. So therefore Tosfot asks, all of them, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, it was all before the Torah was given. and therefore they don't have this status of all the mitzvot. They don't have this status of Jews. So therefore there should not be an issue of being under the Ohel. So why did Rav Banan need to go and mark the area? And he explains, Avram Avinu, Abraham, Adam, they were different. They were of such greatness and such holiness that it applies to them also. They also would have this greater degree of tumah, and therefore Rabbanah needed to ascertain. So what follows from Tosfot is a very, very literal understanding of this story of Rabbanah, and therefore there is an issue of this impurity of a grave site when going to Marat HaMachpelah. There is another Rishon, Rav Binyamin of Tudela, who lived from 11 in the 12th century, who described a visit to Hebron back then in the 12th century, and he says there, the keeper of the gate allowed me to go down through a series of gates where he saw markers for the graves of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rivka, Yaakov, Jacob, and Leah. And he also saw barrels of bones, where it seemed to him that many Jewish people had brought their dead to be buried next to the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And therefore, if that is the case, so it's clear that according to Tosafot, it is prohibited for Kohanim to enter Marat HaMachpelah because the Avot themselves have this Tumat Ohel. And according to the testimony of Rav Binyamin of Tudela, there is another problem. Even if we'll argue and say that the Avot should not have and would not have this added degree, added layer of Tumah of impurity, but there are bones of lots of other Jews, all of them after the Torah having been given, that were buried there. And therefore it seems clear that Kohanim are not allowed to go and daven there. And I remember when I was living in Israel, teaching at the yeshiva that I was teaching, when we would take the boys to Marat HaMachpelah, those boys who were Kohanim would accompany us on the trip, but would stay outside the building, and they would pray at the closest place where they were able to go to this holy, holy place. Very similar, you go to the Kotel, they have the Kotel tunnel tours that go, the Kotel is a small part of this massive wall, and they have, archaeologically, they dug, and you go alongside the Kotel, but under the ground, and you go then moving to the left of the Kotel, and there's a certain point as you're going through the tunnel tours where you are right across from the Kodesh Kadashim, right across from the Holy of Holies. And that is the closest place that we are allowed to get to the Holy of Holies. So therefore, there certainly is this concept, this value in being as close as one can halachically get. So on this trip, the Kohanim, the boys who were Kohanim, would accompany us on the trip, and they would pray right outside the building. But to go into the building, they would not do as Kohanim. But for us to go to go there, certainly allowed, and to go to mosques also would be allowed. Right? We mentioned the idea you don't want to be giving them this honor, this privilege. But I'd say in the world today, where things are very tense, it's probably a good idea for us to make sure that there is this mutual respect. Right? When Beth Jacob was vandalized with the graffiti, so one of the Shabbos after that, a number of important Orange County Muslim sheikhs and leaders came to our Shabbos morning davening in order to show solidarity with us. And something like that, in my opinion, when it would be to show solidarity for them, so then it would be a proper thing for us to go and participate. Not going there as accepting all the tenets of Islam, as they who came to us were not accepting all the tenets of Judaism, but it was to show a solidarity and a mutual respect. And it really is incredible that we're reading these parshiot now. We read about Avraham acquiring this area. Now we're reading about Jacob and his wives. In this week's Torah reading, Jacob and Rachel and Leah, and that we know where they are buried. For those who think, it's all just this folklore. No, we actually know we have a non-broken chain of transmission, that this is where the people that we're reading about in the Torah reading these weeks, this is where they are buried. And we also go to Joseph's tomb, where Joseph is buried. And we also go to where Rachel is buried. And truly, when we go to Israel, our Tanakh, our scripture, our history, our Judaism really, really comes to life. We're actually walking the places where they all are. And sadly now, going to Marat Machpelah is a trip that requires much security. Going to Rachel's tomb, Kever Rachel in Beit Lechem, I remember when we used to drive out there with a bus and get out and walk through the building. Now it's almost going through these concrete walls on either side. It's going into a war zone. Unfortunately, as a result of the peace process, that is what it became. Kind of strange, huh? But that's the reality today. But nevertheless, we do go there. We do daven there. We do pray there. And like I said, it is amazing when we can literally walk and be at the places where the people that we read about in our Torah reading, where they lived and where they are buried, again, with an unbroken chain of transmission, that this is where this person is buried. Okay, my friends, we'll call it over here. Any questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves. Otherwise, we will call it a day. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, we're having a little Malava Malka get together. There'll be some snacks. I'll have my guitar. We'll have some different things. It'll be a chance just to mingle and talk to one another as we are, please God, getting beyond the COVID very restrictive restrictions, still some restrictions, but as we move forward, it gives us the opportunity to come together as a community, certainly to welcome the many new members that have joined us, but have been unable to really connect so well because we had limited davenings. So it'll be a chance to welcome them into the community and to get to know them a little better. So that's Saturday night at 6:30. Please do, there's no cost, but please do RSVP so that we will know how much to prepare for. Okay, everybody? A good day. Tomorrow tonight, 6:30, and a good Shabbos, everybody. Shabbat
Good
Shalom.
Shabbos. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.